The mountain man found the obese girl. Raising an entire tribe's orphans, he became the father of all. The snowfall came early in the autumn of 1825, blanketing the Dakota Territory in a silence so profound it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. Miriam Clark stood at the entrance of the Buffalo Hide Lodge, her considerable frame silhouetted against the dying light, watching the last of the Mandan survivors disappear into the white horizon. 23 pairs of eyes watched with her, some filled with tears, others vacant with the incomprehension of youth too tender to grasp abandonment. "They're really gone," whispered Small Crow, a girl of 9 winters whose mother had died clutching her just 3 weeks prior. Her Mandan name meant brave little bird, but there was nothing brave in her voice now, only the hollow echo of a child learning that the world could be cruel beyond measure. Miriam's weathered hands, cracked and calloused from years that had transformed a merchant's daughter from Philadelphia into something the frontier had forged anew, closed around the girl's shoulders. "We're still here," she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "And where there's breath, there's hope." The smallpox had come like a demon in the night, carried by traders whose promises of prosperity brought only pestilence. The disease had shown no mercy, transforming healthy warriors into fever-ridden corpses within days, turning beautiful women into masses of pustulent sores, stealing infants from their mothers' breasts. Miriam had survived it once before, as a child in Pennsylvania, and the pockmarks on her face testified to that victory. This time, she'd nursed the sick until her hands bled, held the dying until her arms ached, and buried more bodies than she could count. The survivors, barely 30 souls from a village that once housed 200, had made their choice. Moved north to join the Hidatsa, their traditional allies, where game still ran and the sickness hadn't yet reached. But they couldn't take the children, not all of them. Too many mouths, too few provisions, winter closing in like a fist. The elderly Chief Grey Wolf had wept when he told her. "You are strong, Miriam who endures," he'd said, using the name the tribe had given her after she'd survived her first brutal winter among them. "The Great Spirit made you large, so you could carry great burdens. These children are our future, but we cannot carry them through the snow. If you stay, perhaps some will survive. If they come, all will surely perish." It was a death sentence dressed in hope, and they both knew it. He had left them with 1 travois loaded with dried meat, a pouch of seeds, 3 iron pots, ammunition for her ancient rifle, and the lodge itself. Charity measured in pounds, cruelty measured in the weight of 23 children. The youngest was barely 2 winters, a boy named Runs with Wind, though he'd done precious little running since his parents died. The oldest was Elk Runner, 14, tall and lean with his father's proud bearing. He was the only one who'd watched the tribe leave without crying, his jaw set in a way that reminded Miriam of carved stone. "We should inventory what we have," Elk Runner said in English, which he spoke better than most, thanks to his father's insistence that he learn the white man's tongue. "Know what we're working with." Miriam nodded, grateful for his pragmatism. Together they counted. 300 pounds of dried buffalo meat, half that in pemmican, a bushel of wild turnips, dried berries, and the seeds, corn, squash, beans, useless until spring if spring ever came for them. The rifle had ammunition for perhaps 30 shots. After that, they'd be reduced to snares, deadfalls, and prayer. "Enough for maybe 2 moons if we're careful," Elk Runner calculated, his young face creased with worry far too aged for his years. "Less if the little ones get sick again." "Then we'll hunt," Miriam said with more confidence than she felt. "Fish through the ice. I've trapped before. Your people taught me well." "My people left us," he said, bitterness sharp as a flint knife in his voice. "Your people made an impossible choice," Miriam corrected gently, "and we're going to prove they were right to believe we could survive it." The first weeks were a descent into a special kind of hell designed by winter's cruel imagination. Miriam rose before dawn and returned after dark, checking trap lines she'd set in concentric circles around their camp. She caught rabbits mostly, stringy things that yielded barely enough meat to justify the effort of skinning them, but occasionally a beaver or muskrat. She taught the older children to fish through holes cut in the river ice, showing them how to jig the line, how to be patient. Elk Runner proved himself invaluable, a natural leader who organized the others into working units. The middle children, those between 7 and 11, gathered firewood, learned to recognize which deadfall was seasoned enough to burn without choking smoke. The younger ones had simpler tasks, keeping the fire fed, sewing torn clothing, grinding dried meat into powder that could be stretched into more meals with hot water. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. 2 months into their isolation, a blizzard struck with the fury of an angry god. For 3 days, they huddled in the lodge while wind screamed like tormented spirits and snow piled high enough to bury their world in white silence. When it finally passed, the cold that followed was so intense that water thrown into the air froze before hitting the ground. Miriam's traps yielded nothing. The animals had gone deep into their dens, had more sense than humans trapped by circumstance. The meat ran out. Then the pemmican. They were reduced to boiling bones for the 3rd and 4th time, extracting phantom nutrition from marrow long since consumed, trying to trick their bellies into quietness with hot water flavored by memory. Runs with Wind stopped crying, which should have been a relief, but instead terrified Miriam. The boy lay listless in his buffalo robes, his eyes glassy, his breathing shallow. Twin Feathers, a girl of 4, wasn't much better. Miriam held them both, trying to warm them with her body heat, singing songs her mother had taught her in that other life, in that other world where children died of consumption and cholera, but at least died indoors, in beds with doctors who pretended they could help. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, unsure whether she was addressing the Christian God of her childhood or the Great Spirit the Mandan had taught her to respect. "Please, not these babies. Take me if you need a soul, but let them live. Please." Elk Runner touched her shoulder. "Miriam, we need to talk about what happens if—" "No," she said sharply. "We don't talk about that. We don't give death a voice in this lodge. We fight. That's what we do. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with." But what did you fight with when hope itself had starved down to bones? The answer came on a morning so cold that breath crystallized instantly into ice, when the sun hung low and pale like a dying ember in a frozen sky. Miriam was outside, desperately checking the trap line closest to camp, when she heard it. The sharp crack of a rifle shot, distant but unmistakable. Her heart seized. Traitors? Trappers? After all these months of isolation, the sound of human activity should have brought relief. Instead, it brought fear. She'd seen what some men became out here, beyond law and consequence. The wilderness didn't just challenge men, it revealed them, stripped away civilization's veneer to expose what lurked beneath. And not all men had anything decent hidden under that veneer. She was hurrying back to camp when she saw him, a massive figure moving through the trees with the fluid grace of a predator, draped in furs that made him look more bear than man. He moved on snowshoes, a rifle cradled in his arms, and he was following her tracks. Miriam ran, her breath tearing from her lungs in frozen gasps, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. The children. She had to get to the children, had to stand between them and whatever this stranger wanted. She burst into the camp, gasping, "Inside, all of you, now!" The older children reacted instantly, herding the younger ones into the lodge. Elk Runner emerged with the rifle, his hands steady despite his youth. "There's a man coming," Miriam said, positioning herself at the lodge entrance. "Stay behind me. No matter what happens, you stay behind me." The stranger emerged from the tree line moments later, pausing when he saw her. A large woman in a buffalo coat, face flushed with exertion and fear, standing like a fortress before a buffalo hide lodge that barely contained her protective fury. "Madame," he called out in French-accented English, raising one hand to show he meant no harm. "I mean no trouble. I heard children's voices carried on the wind yesterday, and I thought, this is no place for children alone." "We're not alone," Miriam said, her voice hard, "and we don't need help from strangers." The man stopped, perhaps 20 paces away, studying her with eyes that seemed to weigh and measure more than just physical threat. He was enormous, she realized, at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that belonged on a bull and a beard that fell to his chest in brown waves threaded with gray. His face was weathered to leather by sun and wind, but his eyes, dark and surprisingly gentle, held something that made her pause. "My name is Liam Beaumont," he said, carefully lowering his rifle to the ground. "I've trapped these territories for 15 years. I have a winter camp 1 day's walk south of here. I came to check my trap line and saw small footprints in the snow, many small footprints. So I followed because—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Because children should not be making footprints alone in this wilderness during winter." "Their footprints aren't alone," Miriam said. "I'm with them." I see that now. But madame, I also see that you are, forgive my bluntness, in desperate straits. I can smell hunger from here. It has a scent, you know, sharp like metal and fear." Behind her, she heard Runs with Wind begin to cough, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of lungs filling with fluid. The sound seemed to strike the stranger like a physical blow. He took a step forward, and Elk Runner's rifle rose immediately. "Stop," the boy said, his voice cracking between child and man. "Don't come closer." Liam froze, his eyes moving from the rifle to Elk Runner's face. "You have courage, young warrior. That rifle is older than you, but I believe you would use it. I respect that." He looked back at Miriam. "I have meat, fresh elk, killed this morning. I have medicine, willow bark for fever, yarrow for infection. I have wool blankets from a trading post 3 weeks' travel from here, and I am willing to share all of this, asking nothing in return except—" He paused, and something raw showed in his face. "Except the knowledge that I did not walk away from children dying in the snow. I lost my own daughters to fever 5 winters ago, their mother too. Please, let me help them. If you will not trust me near, I will leave supplies outside your camp and go, but please, let me help." Miriam saw the truth in his face, grief that had carved canyons into his features, pain that had taught him what loss really meant. She understood that pain. It was written in her bones too. "Wait there," she said. She ducked into the lodge, where 23 pairs of eyes watched her with a mixture of hope and fear. "He says he has food and medicine." "Could be a trap," Elk Runner said. "Could be more of them waiting." "Could be," Miriam agreed. "But Runs with Wind is dying. Twin Feathers, too. If this is a trap, at least they might eat one more meal before—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "We're dead anyway if nothing changes. Maybe this is the Great Spirit's answer. Maybe God sent him. Or maybe it's just a trapper who remembers being human. Either way, I'm taking the chance." She returned outside. "You can help, but you sleep outside the lodge. You make no sudden moves around the children. And if you do anything at all, that makes me think you mean them harm, that boy in there will shoot you, and I will help him bury your body in the snow. Clear?" A smile broke across Liam's weathered face like sunrise. "Madame, you are more fearsome than any grizzly I have encountered, and I have great respect for grizzlies. Your terms are accepted." He was true to his word. By nightfall, he'd brought haunches of elk meat from his cache, along with a pack full of supplies that seemed miraculous in their abundance. He showed Miriam how to make a broth strong enough to nourish the sick babies, adding herbs whose names she didn't know but whose effects she could see. Within hours, Runs with Wind's breathing eased and Twin Feathers' fever broke. He made camp outside the lodge, building a small lean-to for himself with practiced efficiency. The children watched him through gaps in the buffalo hide, their wariness gradually giving way to curiosity as this strange giant of a man proved himself harmless. He sang while he worked, French songs that lilted and swirled like creek water over stones, and somehow his presence made the wilderness feel less hostile, as if his bulk alone pushed back the encroaching darkness. That night, after the children were asleep, their bellies full for the first time in weeks, Miriam sat by the fire with Liam. The stars overhead were brilliant chips of ice in an obsidian sky. "Why?" she asked simply. He stared into the flames for a long time. "I told you about my daughters, Marie and Claire, 4 and 6 when the fever took them. My wife, Josephine, she died trying to nurse them. All 3 went into the ground on the same day." His voice was rough, abraded by memory. "I came west to forget, to lose myself in the wilderness because the civilization that couldn't save them seemed like a lie. But you cannot forget children. Their ghosts follow you even into the empty places." He looked at her then, and she saw tears frozen on his cheeks. "When I heard those small voices on the wind, I thought perhaps I had finally gone mad. Then I found your tracks, and I realized the wilderness was giving me something. Not my daughters back, never that, but perhaps a chance to be the man I couldn't be for them, the man who saves children instead of burying them." Miriam felt something crack open in her chest, a place sealed shut by her own losses and griefs. "I was engaged once," she said quietly, "before the Pawnee took me. Thomas Clark, a good man who worked in my father's shipping company. I was 23 pounds lighter and thought I knew what love meant." She laughed bitterly. "The Pawnee traded me to the Mandan within a month. Turns out I wasn't valuable enough to keep. But the Mandan, they saw something different. They saw someone who could work, who could endure. They didn't care that I was fat. They cared that I was strong." "You are more than strong," Liam said softly. "You are what the French call formidable, fearsome, awe-inspiring. To stay with these children when you could have left, to choose this impossible task, that is not mere strength, that is something greater." They sat in companionable silence, 2 broken people who'd found purpose in the pieces. The days that followed established a rhythm. Liam hunted, bringing back deer, elk, even a buffalo he'd found separated from its herd. He taught the older boys to construct deadfalls and snares, showing them the patterns of animal behavior, where to set the traps for maximum efficiency. He was patient, never mocking their mistakes, praising their successes with genuine warmth. Miriam watched him with the children and saw something transforming in both directions. The children, who'd been wary and fearful, began to approach him with questions, with requests for stories, with the easy trust that children extend when adults prove themselves worthy. And Liam, who'd carried grief like a stone around his neck, began to laugh again. Real laughter, not the hollow kind that's just noise. He carved toys for the younger ones during the long evenings, wooden animals, dolls, a miniature toboggan that delighted everyone. His knife moved with practiced grace, shaving away wood to reveal horses, bears, eagles trapped within. The children would cluster around him, watching in silent fascination as something beautiful emerged from nothing. It was Small Crow who first called him Papa Bear. She'd been sitting in his lap while he carved, drowsy with warmth and contentment when she murmured it against his chest. The name stuck. Soon all the children were using it, and Liam wore the title like an honor he'd never expected to receive. 3 months after his arrival, winter began to loosen its grip. The days grew incrementally longer. Ice started to sing as it broke up in the river, and with the thaw came danger. They appeared on a morning touched by false spring warmth, 5 men on horseback, hard-looking individuals with eyes that calculated value in everything they saw. Miriam recognized their type immediately. She'd seen such men before, traders who dealt in commodities that shouldn't be traded, who saw people as things to be bought and sold. The leader was a scarecrow of a man named Pike, with a face like a hatchet blade and a smile that had forgotten how to reach his eyes. "Well now," he said, surveying the camp with predatory interest. Quite the collection you've got here. Liam stepped forward, placing himself between the riders and the lodge. This is a private camp. You're welcome to water your horses and move on. Private, he says, Pike laughed, and his companions echoed the sound like coyotes yipping. Funny thing about wilderness, ain't much private about it, especially when you're sitting on something valuable. There's nothing valuable here, Miriam said, emerging from the lodge. The children were inside with Elk Runner, who she'd instructed to keep them quiet and hidden. Pike's eyes crawled over her with insulting slowness. That's a matter of perspective, ain't it? I see at least 20 half-breed children. Mexican ranchers pay good money for young workers. $50 a head, no questions asked. That's $1,000 in that lodge of yours. These children aren't for sale, Liam said, his voice dropping to a register that Miriam had never heard. Cold, flat, dangerous. Leave now, while you can still ride. Or what? Pike's hand moved to the pistol at his belt. You gonna take on all 5 of us, Mountain Man? You might get 1 or 2, but the rest'll cut you down, and then we'll take the children anyway, along with that fat squaw of yours. It happened faster than Miriam could track. Liam's hand shot out, grabbing Pike's ankle and yanking him from his saddle with such force the man flipped completely over before crashing to the ground. The rifle Liam had kept close was suddenly in his hands, the barrel pointed at the nearest rider. The next man who touches his weapon dies, Liam said calmly. And the one after that. I can kill 3 of you before you even clear leather. Ask yourselves if Pike is worth dying for. The riders exchanged glances, hands hovering near their weapons but not quite touching. Pike groaned on the ground, trying to get his breath back. You broke my ribs, he wheezed. I'll break more than that if you don't mount up and leave, Liam said. But first I want your word, all of you, that you'll speak nothing of this camp. These children don't exist. You never saw them. And why would we give you that word? One of the other men asked. Because if I hear even a whisper about Mandan orphans in these territories, I will hunt each of you down personally. I will find you in whatever hole you're hiding in, and I will end you. Not quickly, not cleanly. I have learned things from the tribes about making death last. His smile was terrible. I used to be civilized, but civilization is a long way from here, and I found I don't miss it much. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Pike struggled to his feet, clutching his ribs, his face twisted with pain and rage. This ain't over. Yes, it is, Liam said. You just don't know it yet. They left, but the satisfaction of watching them ride away was poisoned by certainty. Men like that didn't forget. They'd be back with more men, better prepared. The camp wasn't safe anymore. That night, Liam and Miriam held a council with Elk Runner. We need to move, Liam said. My winter camp is more defensible. It's in a canyon with only one entrance, harder to approach unseen, but it's a hard journey with young children. Harder than staying here and waiting for them to return? Miriam asked. They will return, Elk Runner said with certainty beyond his years. Men like that always do. Greed is stronger than fear. Then we move at first light, Miriam decided. Pack everything we can carry, cache the rest. Maybe we can come back for it, maybe not. They worked through the night, organizing supplies, fashioning travois that the older children could pull. Liam disappeared for an hour and returned with 2 more deer slung over his shoulders, meat they'd need for the journey. His strength seemed limitless, superhuman. You're going to hurt yourself, Miriam scolded, watching him work without rest. I've survived worse, he said, his smile gentle in the firelight. Besides, I have motivation now. 23 reasons to stay strong. 24, Miriam said softly. He looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. 24. They left at dawn, a ragged column of children and 2 adults who'd somehow become a family without noticing the transformation. The journey to Liam's Canyon camp took 5 brutal days. The younger children had to be carried in shifts, strapped to Liam's back or cradled in Miriam's arms. They stopped frequently, hunted constantly, never stayed in one place long enough to establish a pattern. On the third day, Small Crow pointed at tracks in the mud. "Someone followed us," she said, her voice small. Liam examined the prints, his face grim. "Pike's men. 3 of them, by the look of it. Tracking us, but staying back, probably waiting to see where we hole up." That night, he left camp after dark. Miriam tried to stop him, but he was immovable. "They'll track us all the way to the canyon, then wait until we're comfortable before they strike. I need to convince them that following us is a bad investment." He returned at dawn, his face spattered with blood that wasn't his. He said nothing about what had happened out there in the dark, and Miriam didn't ask. Some things were better left in shadows. They saw no more tracks after that. The canyon was everything Liam promised, a hidden pocket in the Badlands, with steep walls and a narrow entrance that could be watched by a single sentry. A creek ran through it, providing fresh water, and Liam had built a substantial log cabin against the cliff face, using the rock as one wall. It was rough but solid, with a fireplace made of stacked stones and enough space for all of them to sleep inside. "You built this yourself?" Miriam asked, awed by the craftsmanship. "Over 5 winters," he said. "I thought I was building a hermitage. Turns out I was building a home." The children explored their new sanctuary with wonder. There was room to run here, space to play. After months of confinement and fear, the release was palpable. They laughed, real laughter, and the sound echoed off the canyon walls like music. That night, after the children were settled, Liam found Miriam standing at the canyon entrance, staring at stars. "You're worried," he said. "Pike won't give up," she said. "Men like that don't." "Pike is dead," Liam said quietly. "So are the 3 men who were tracking us. Their bodies are feeding the coyotes somewhere in the Badlands. The others will have scattered by now. They're opportunists, not avengers. Without Pike's leadership, they'll find easier prey." Miriam should have been shocked, should have been horrified. Instead, she felt only a grim satisfaction. "You did that for the children." "I did that for all of us," he corrected, "for the family we've become." She turned to face him fully. "Is that what we are? A family? What else would you call it?" He gestured back toward the cabin, where 23 children slept peacefully for the first time in months. "We protect them together. We feed them together. We love them together. If that's not family, I don't know what is." "Family?" Miriam repeated, tasting the word. It felt strange and right simultaneously, like finding a shoe that fits after years of walking barefoot. "I haven't had one of those since Philadelphia." "Neither have I since Josephine died," Liam said. "Maybe that's what we are, broken people who found each other's missing pieces in the wilderness." She wanted to kiss him then, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised her. But before she could move, voices rose from the cabin, children having nightmares, children needing comfort. The moment passed, transformed into shared purpose as they hurried inside to soothe small fears and chase away darkness with presence and warmth. Spring arrived in earnest, painting the canyon with wildflowers and new grass. The children thrived under routine and safety. Liam taught the boys to hunt and track, showing them how to read sign in mud and bent grass, how to move silently through the wilderness, when to take a shot and when to wait. Miriam taught everyone, boys and girls alike, to read and write, using a Bible and a collection of dime novels Liam had accumulated over the years. She taught them numbers, history, geography, trying to give them tools to navigate both the Mandan world and the white world that was encroaching from the east. Elk Runner proved a gifted student, soaking up knowledge like parched, earth-absorbing rain. "My father wanted me to understand both worlds," he explained to Miriam one afternoon. "He said the future belonged to those who could walk between them." "Your father was wise," Miriam said. "Do you think he's still alive?" The boy's face clouded. The disease took him. I saw him fall with fever. But uncertainty flickered in his eyes, a ghost of hope he was afraid to acknowledge. Summer brought traders to the region, men traveling with goods from St. Louis and Santa Fe. Liam was cautious about contact, but they needed supplies: gunpowder, coffee, sugar, fabric for clothes. He ventured out alone, returning with stories and goods and news that made them both thoughtful. The government is pushing treaties, he told Miriam, forcing tribes onto reservations, claiming land that's been theirs for generations. The world is changing fast, and not in ways that favor people like us, those who exist between the lines of their maps. What do we do? Miriam asked. We keep the children safe, Liam said firmly. We teach them to survive in whatever world emerges, and we hope that love and knowledge are armor enough. One evening in late summer, Miriam was working in the garden they had planted: corn, beans, squash, the three sisters of tribal agriculture, when Liam came to stand beside her. The children were playing in the creek, their laughter a counterpoint to rushing water. They're happy, he observed. They are, Miriam agreed. You've given them that. We've given them that. Miriam, he said, and something in his tone made her look up from the weeds she'd been pulling. I need to say something, and I'm not sure how to say it properly. I'm a rough man, not educated like you, not smooth with words. You speak just fine, she said, her heart suddenly pounding. I love you, he said simply. Not because you're convenient, not because we're stuck together out here. I love you because you're fierce and brave and strong, because you chose to save these children when no one else would, because you see me, the real me, not the monster I became when my family died, and you don't flinch away. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. Miriam stood, dirt on her hands and sweat on her face, feeling more beautiful than she'd ever felt in Philadelphia society with all its fine dresses and elaborate manners. I love you too, she said. I think I have since the day you offered to leave supplies and walk away, but I was too scared to name it. Yes, Liam, yes to all of it. Their kiss was clumsy and perfect, witnessed by 23 children who erupted into cheers and laughter. Small Crow shouted, Does this mean Papa Bear and Mama Miriam are married now? Not yet, Liam laughed, but soon, if she'll have me properly. I'll have you any way I can get you, Miriam said, and meant it with her entire soul. They were married in August by a Presbyterian circuit rider who passed through the region twice a year. The children helped prepare a feast: roasted venison, wild turkey, corn cakes, berry preserves. They decorated the canyon with wildflowers, and Elk Runner played a flute he'd carved himself, filling the air with music that was neither white nor Mandan, but something beautifully between. That night, in the privacy of a small room Liam had added to the cabin, they discovered each other with gentle urgency. Miriam had been so convinced that her size made her unlovable, that men only wanted delicate women who could be displayed like ornaments. But Liam worshipped her body with hands that trembled with reverence, murmuring French endearments against her skin, showing her that love had nothing to do with measurements and everything to do with souls recognizing each other across the wilderness. By winter, she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She'd seen so many women die in childbirth, had helped bury mothers and infants together. But Liam's confidence bolstered her, and the children's excitement was infectious. We're having a baby, Ati, Twin Feathers announced to everyone, as if she herself were personally responsible for the miracle. Miriam's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the cold months. The children treated her like precious cargo, insisting she rest, bringing her water and food, arguing over who got to feel the baby kick. Liam was ridiculously protective, wanting her to do nothing more strenuous than breathe, until Miriam finally told him she was pregnant, not dying, and would he please let her live normally. Their daughter was born in March 1827, arriving during a late-season snowstorm with a cry that could wake the dead. Miriam held her, impossibly tiny, impossibly perfect, and wept with relief and joy. They named her Claire Marie, after Liam's lost daughters, giving them a kind of immortality through this new life. The children were enchanted with the baby. Even the boys who'd initially pretended disinterest could be found sneaking peeks at her, making faces to try to coax smiles. Runs with Wind, now a sturdy 4-year-old, appointed himself her official guardian, refusing to let her out of his sight. "She's so small," he said with wonder. "Was I ever that small?" "Smaller," Miriam assured him, remembering the sick, starving baby he'd been 2 years ago. "And now look at you, strong and brave." Life settled into a rhythm that felt permanent. The children grew, learned, thrived. Some would eventually leave to find their fortunes in the changing world. Elk Runner would become a successful trader, moving between white and tribal communities with equal ease. Others would stay close, building their own cabins in the canyon, raising their own families under the protection of the mountain and the watchful eyes of Mama Miriam and Papa Bear. But all that was still to come. One afternoon in late autumn, as Miriam sat nursing Claire while watching Liam teach the older boys to build a proper winter shelter, she felt a profound peace settle over her. This was not the life she had imagined in Philadelphia, in that other existence where she'd worried about ball gowns and proper etiquette. That woman had been shallow, concerned with surfaces, measuring worth in mirrors and marriage proposals. This life had made her real. The wilderness had stripped away everything false, leaving only what mattered: love, courage, purpose. She'd saved these children, yes, but they'd saved her too, given her a reason to endure when endurance seemed impossible, taught her that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. Small Crow appeared at her elbow, now 11 and growing tall. "What are you thinking about, Mama Miriam?" she asked. The girl had started calling her that shortly after the wedding, and the name had spread to all the children, even Elk Runner. "I'm thinking how lucky I am," Miriam said honestly. "Lucky?" Small Crow looked confused. "You were captured by Pawnee, traded like a horse, abandoned in winter with 23 children who weren't even yours. It doesn't sound lucky." "But it led me here," Miriam said. "To all of you, to Papa Bear, to this life. If I could go back and change things, be rescued before the Pawnee took me, escape and return to Philadelphia, I wouldn't. Because I'd lose this, I'd lose you, and you're worth more than any life I left behind." Small Crow hugged her fiercely. "I love you, Mama. I love you too, brave little bird." That winter, their third together, a stranger arrived at the canyon. He came openly, calling out before entering, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. Liam met him with rifle ready, but the man seemed unconcerned about the weapon. "I seek Elk Runner," he said in Mandan, his voice hoarse with travel and something deeper. "I am told a boy of that name lives here." Elk Runner emerged from the cabin, 14 now and nearly as tall as Liam. He looked at the stranger, and his face went slack with shock. "Father?" The man, thin and worn, his face bearing scars Miriam recognized from smallpox, took one stumbling step forward. "My son. You're alive. They told me everyone died." "I thought you died," Elk Runner's voice broke on the words. "I saw you fall with fever." "I recovered," his father, Chief Gray Wolf, though he no longer carried that title like armor, said. "By the time I could stand, the village had moved on, and I was alone. I searched for survivors, for you. I went to the new village, but they told me you'd been left behind with the other orphans, that you must have died in the winter." "We didn't die," Elk Runner said, and suddenly he was crying, this boy who'd been so stoic, so strong. "Mama Miriam kept us alive. And Papa Bear found us when we were starving. They saved us. They saved all of us." Gray Wolf's eyes moved to Miriam, then to Liam, then to the children who'd gathered to witness this reunion. His face worked through a complex series of emotions: grief, guilt, gratitude, wonder. "You did what I could not," he said finally. "You gave them what I couldn't: hope, safety, a future. We gave them love, Miriam corrected gently. The rest followed from that. Gray Wolf spent a week with them, learning about their life in the canyon, watching how the children interacted with Miriam and Liam, seeing how they'd built something new from the ruins of what was lost. On his last night, he sat with them around the fire after the children had gone to bed. I came here thinking I would take Elk Runner with me, he said, return him to the tribe, to his heritage. But I see now that his heritage is here, with all of you. You've created something I don't fully understand, but I can feel its power. You've taken Mandan orphans and raised them with white knowledge and tribal wisdom. You've made them strong enough to survive in both worlds. There are children now, Liam said firmly. Yeah. All of them. We won't let them be separated again. I'm not asking you to, Gray Wolf said. I'm asking if I might stay. If there's room in this canyon family for an old chief who failed his people but wants to spend his remaining years helping raise his son properly. I have skills. I can hunt. I can teach the old ways. I can help protect them. Miriam looked at Liam, who nodded almost imperceptibly. There's always room for one more, she said, especially one who loves these children. Gray Wolf stayed. He built his own small cabin at the far end of the canyon, teaching the children their tribal heritage, the stories, the rituals, the wisdom accumulated over generations. He taught them the Mandan language properly, ensuring they could speak to their ancestors' spirits. With Liam, he taught advanced hunting techniques. With Miriam, he discussed philosophy and ethics, finding common ground between tribal values and Christian morality. The children flourished under this abundant love, growing into young adults who could speak 3 languages, who could track game through any terrain, who could read Shakespeare and explain tribal creation myths with equal facility. They became something new. Not quite white, not quite Mandan, but wholly themselves, confident in their hybrid identity. Years passed. Claire gained siblings. 2 brothers, Joseph and Daniel, born in 1829 and 1832. The older children began leaving to make their own ways, though they returned often with spouses and eventually with children of their own. The canyon became a gathering place, a refuge, a symbol of what was possible when love refused to acknowledge boundaries. Miriam and Liam aged together, their hair graying, their bodies wearing down from decades of hard living. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, enriched by shared purpose and countless small moments of joy accumulated over time. In 1867, 42 years after that first desperate winter, Miriam Clark Beaumont died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by more than 200 descendants, children she'd saved, children they'd raised together, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. She was 70 years old, had lived to see the Civil War end, had watched the frontier she knew transform into something unrecognizable. They buried her on a hill overlooking the canyon, and Liam insisted on a headstone large enough to be seen from the cabin. He wrote the inscription himself, with Elk Runner, now a distinguished elder of the reformed Mandan tribe, translating it into their ancestral tongue. Miriam Clark Beaumont, 1797-1867, she who stayed when others left, she who loved when others feared, she who made family from fragments, beloved wife, mother, and heart of the canyon. Beneath the English, the Mandan word said simply, she chose love over comfort. She chose us. Liam lived 3 more years, spending his time teaching the youngest generation, telling stories about Mama Miriam, ensuring her memory stayed vivid. He died in 1870, and they buried him beside her, their graves marked by a single oak tree that grew between the headstones, branches entwining, as if the tree itself understood what they'd meant to each other. The canyon remained a family gathering place for generations. In the 1920s, one of Miriam and Liam's great-great-grandchildren, a professor at Columbia University, returned to the canyon with a team of historians. They documented the story, interviewed the remaining survivors who'd known the original orphans, collected artifacts. The cabin still stood, weathered but solid, Liam's craftsmanship proving as enduring as his love. Inside, they found Miriam's Bible, its margins filled with notes in her handwriting, recipes, remedies, observations about the children's growth. They found Liam's journals, documenting their life together with spare, powerful prose. They found carved wooden toys, teaching primers, a flute that had belonged to Elk Runner. But more than artifacts, they found a legacy. Families that traced their lineage back to those 23 orphans, people who carried the blood of the Mandan people mixed with the blood of French trappers and English colonists, creating something uniquely American. They found evidence of a truth the nation was still struggling to accept, that love was stronger than blood, that family was something you built, and that the wilderness could be as much a place of salvation as destruction. The professor wrote a book about it, documenting how a captured woman and a grieving mountain man had created a small miracle in the Badlands of Dakota Territory. How they'd taken abandoned children and raised them to be leaders, teachers, traders, and warriors. How they'd defied every expectation placed on them by simply refusing to give up, to give in, to stop loving. The book's final chapter quoted Elk Runner, interviewed in 1892 at age 81, shortly before his death. People ask me what made Mama Miriam and Papa Bear special. They weren't warriors, they weren't chiefs, they weren't wealthy or powerful, but they possessed something rarer than any of those things. They had the courage to love when loving meant sacrifice. They chose us when choosing us meant hardship and danger and possibly death. They built a family from broken pieces because they understood that broken pieces could still fit together if you were patient and gentle and refused to give up. That canyon taught me what matters in this life. Not blood, not tribe, not the color of your skin or the language you speak. What matters is simple. Who will stand with you in the winter? Who will share their last piece of bread when hunger comes? Who will fight for you when danger appears? Who will love you when you're difficult to love? Mama Miriam and Papa Bear answered those questions with their lives. They stood with us. They shared everything. They fought for us. They loved us when we were most difficult, when we were orphans nobody wanted, when we were sick and scared and angry at the world. That's what I learned in the canyon. That's what I've tried to pass on to my children and their children. Love isn't something you feel. It's something you do every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And if you do it long enough, you build something that lasts forever, not in stone or monuments, but in people, in the way we treat each other, in the families we create from nothing but determination and hope. That's the legacy they left us, not wealth or land or titles, just love. And in the end, that's the only thing that really matters. In the canyon today, the headstones still stand, the oak tree still grows, its branches still reaching toward the sky as if in prayer. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the canyon, you can almost hear it. The laughter of children playing, the sound of a flute, the gentle murmur of a French lullaby, the echo of two souls who found each other in the wilderness and created something beautiful from desperation and hope. The mountain man and the woman the world called unlovable proved that the wilderness could be kind if you brought kindness with you. That family was something you built, not something you were born into. That love was the strongest force in creation when you were brave enough to choose it again and again through winter and hardship and impossible odds. They chose love, and love was enough. The blind woman who found the mountain man dying in the snow and saved him with her bare hands. The winter of 1823 came to the Rockies like a wolf to a wounded elk, silent, merciless, and hungry. Ruth Brennan sat in her father's cabin, running her thick fingers along the grooves of the table he'd carved 15 years ago when she was 11, and could still see the world in colors she now only remembered in dreams. She was 26, unmarked by any man's affection, heavy-bodied from a life of limited movement, and utterly alone. The people at Fort William, 3 miles down the frozen creek, had made it abundantly clear what they thought of Thomas Brennan's blind daughter. A burden, a waste of resources, a mouth that consumed provisions better spent on the trappers who brought wealth to the territory. Her father had been different. Thomas Brennan, one of the first mountain men to venture into these peaks, had refused to see his daughter's blindness as a weakness. When the fever took her sight at age 11, most men would have sent her back east to live with relatives or surrendered her to an institution. Thomas had done neither. "Your eyes are gone, Ruthie," he'd told her that first terrible year when she'd wept and raged at the eternal darkness. "But you've got hands that can read the world better than most men's eyes ever will. You've got ears that'll hear a grizzly from 100 yards. You've got a nose that'll tell you when the snow's coming 3 days before it falls. I'll teach you to use them all." And he had. For 14 years, Thomas had trained his daughter in the brutal art of mountain survival. He'd taught her to navigate by sound and smell, to identify animal tracks by touch alone, to know when meat was spoiled by the faintest shift in odor, to sense changes in air pressure that warned of storms. He had made her memorize the cabin and the surrounding area in such intimate detail that she could move through the darkness with more confidence than sighted men moved through daylight. Ruth had learned to trap rabbits and squirrels, to skin and cure hides by feel, to distinguish between edible and poisonous plants by scent and texture. She'd learned to fire a rifle by sound. Her father would call out directions, and she'd adjust her aim until the barrel pointed true. She couldn't hunt game, but she could defend herself against predators, animal or human. But then the consumption had come for Thomas, eating him from the inside out until he'd coughed his last breath into a bloodied rag 2 winters ago. The fort's inhabitants had attended his burial with thin smiles, already calculating how soon the blind woman would follow her father into the frozen ground. They'd made half-hearted promises to check on her, to bring supplies. At first, they'd kept those promises, barely. A sack of flour every few weeks, some dried beans, occasionally a portion of venison when the hunters felt generous. But as the months passed, the visits became less frequent. This winter, they'd stopped coming entirely. Ruth knew what they hoped for. She could hear it in their voices on the rare occasions they did appear, that false sympathy masking their wish that she'd simply starve or freeze, sparing them the guilt of outright murder while achieving the same result. She'd surprised them by surviving. The traps her father had taught her to set still caught rabbits and the occasional beaver. She had a store of dried meat from the previous autumn, carefully rationed. The root cellar held potatoes and turnips. She collected pine needles for tea, gathered rose hips for their precious vitamin C. She knew how to render fat for candles, how to patch her clothes with scraps, how to bank a fire so it burned through the night on minimal wood. Still, this winter was testing her limits. The snows had come early and deep. Her woodpile was dwindling faster than anticipated. The traps were yielding less, the game had moved to lower elevations, and the loneliness, always present, had grown into something physical, a weight on her chest that sometimes made it hard to breathe. On the night everything changed, Ruth sat by her fire, running her fingers over a beaver pelt she'd trapped 3 days earlier. The fur was prime, thick and soft. She'd cure it, and if she survived until spring, trade it at the fort for flour, if they'd accept it. Increasingly, the traders found excuses to give her less than fair value, knowing she had no way to take her business elsewhere. The wind screamed outside, shaking the cabin's walls. Another blizzard, the third in a week. Ruth added a log to the fire, then settled back in her chair, wrapping a bearskin around her shoulders. She'd doze, but not truly sleep. Sleep was dangerous when the cold was this severe. She was half dreaming of her father's voice when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a groan, low and barely human, coming from just beyond her door. Ruth's head snapped up. She sat motionless, listening. The wind, the creak of trees, the tick of snow against the cabin walls. And there, again, not wind, not animal, human. Someone was dying on her doorstep. For a long moment, Ruth didn't move. The smart thing would be to stay inside. Anyone out in the storm was either a fool or fleeing something worse than the cold. Opening her door could mean inviting death inside in more ways than one. But she heard the sound again, weaker now, failing. And Ruth knew, as her father had taught her, that in the mountains, you didn't leave people to die, not if you wanted to remain human yourself. She stood, pulling the bare skin tighter, and moved to the door with the confidence of someone who'd crossed this floor 1,000 times in darkness. She lifted the bar and pushed. The wind nearly tore the door from her hands, and the cold hit her like a fist. Snow swirled into the cabin, and the temperature dropped instantly. Ruth dropped to her knees, reaching out into the storm. Her hands found fabric first, wool, frozen stiff, then skin, ice cold and barely registering warmth. A body, male by the size and weight of it, collapsed in the snow not 3 feet from her threshold. She grabbed him under the arms and pulled. He was heavy, solid muscle, not fat like her, and the snow fought her for every inch. Her own considerable weight became an advantage, anchoring her as she hauled him backward into the cabin. It took all her strength and several minutes to drag him fully inside. She slammed the door shut, gasping, then dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently, reading his condition through touch. Pulse, weak but present, breathing, shallow, irregular, body temperature, dangerously low, and wounds. Her fingers found torn flesh across his torso, deep gouges that could only be claw marks, bear attack, and recent by the ice crystals still embedded in the wounds. Ruth's mind raced through what her father had taught her. Hypothermia first, that would kill him within hours if she didn't act. The wounds were serious but not immediately lethal if she could stop infection. She moved with practiced efficiency, her blindness irrelevant in the firelit cabin she knew as intimately as her own body. First, she stripped his frozen clothing, her hands reading the extent of the damage. The bear had caught him across the chest and shoulder, 4 parallel gashes, deep but not deep enough to hit vital organs. His left leg was badly bruised, possibly from a fall. Frostbite on 3 fingers of his right hand and both his ears. She worked by the fire, warming water in her kettle. While it heated, she covered him with every blanket and fur she owned, then lay down beside him, pressing her own body's warmth against his. The heat exchange was slow but necessary. Direct contact was the fastest way to warm a freezing man. As she worked, she listened to his breathing, learning its rhythm. Still alive, still fighting. When the water was warm, not hot, which could shock his system, she carefully cleaned the wounds. Her fingers told her what her eyes couldn't: the tears in his flesh, the depth of each wound, the areas that would need careful attention. She'd done this before, with animals her father had trapped. The principle was the same, even if the stakes were higher. She mixed salt into the warm water, precious salt from her dwindling supply, and used it to flush each wound. The man groaned, half-conscious, but didn't wake. Good. Conscious meant pain, and pain meant movement, which she couldn't afford while working. For the deep wounds, she remembered her father's teaching. Ruth moved to her supplies and found the pine resin she'd collected and boiled down in autumn. She warmed it slightly by the fire until it was pliable, then used it as a sealant for the deepest gash, the one that still seeped blood. The resin would keep the wound closed and prevent infection. The trappers had learned it from the Indians, who'd used it for generations. She tore strips from one of her spare shirts to make bandages, wrapping his torso tightly. The pressure would help slow any remaining bleeding. His frost-bitten fingers she treated with cool, not cold water, then wrapped gently. The ears were harder. She could only keep them covered and hope the damage wasn't severe enough to cause permanent loss. By the time she finished, dawn was breaking outside, though Ruth only knew it by the gradual shift in the cabin's ambient sound as the night wind died down. The man's breathing had deepened and his skin felt warmer against hers. He would live, at least through this day. Only then did Ruth allow herself to wonder who he was and what had brought him to her door. For 3 days, the man drifted in and out of consciousness. Ruth maintained her vigil, changing his bandages twice daily, forcing warm broth between his lips when he was conscious enough to swallow. She'd made the broth from her last chicken, a tough old hen she'd been saving, boiling the bones until every scrap of nutrition had leached into the liquid. She learned his body through those days of tending, the scars that marked him as a man who'd lived hard and fought harder, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years working trap lines and wielding knives, the solid muscle beneath skin tanned dark by mountain sun. He was probably in his 30s, possibly older. It was hard to tell with mountain men who aged differently than city folk. On the 4th day, he woke truly for the first time. Ruth was changing his bandages when she felt his breathing change, becoming deeper and more controlled. She paused, her hands still on his chest. "You're awake," she said. It wasn't a question. "Where?" His voice was a rasp, barely audible. "Where am I?" "My cabin, 3 miles from Fort William. You nearly died on my doorstep 4 nights ago." She continued unwrapping the old bandages, her fingers gentle but efficient. "Bear got you. Deep wounds, but you'll live if infection doesn't set in." She heard him try to move, then groan. "Don't," she said sharply. "You'll tear the wounds open. They're healing, but barely." "Who are you?" There was confusion in his voice, and something else. Wariness. "Ruth Brennan. Thomas Brennan's daughter. And before you ask, yes, I'm blind. Have been for 15 years. Also before you ask, no, I don't need your pity or your worry about whether I can take care of you. I've kept you alive this long." Silence. She could almost hear him processing this information. "How did you—" He coughed, and she reached for a cup of water, holding it to his lips. He drank gratefully. "How did you treat the wounds? How did you even know where they were?" "My hands see better than most people's eyes," Ruth said. "My father taught me. Now save your strength. You can ask questions after you eat something." She moved to the fire and ladled broth into a bowl, then returned to him. "Can you sit up?" With her help, he managed to prop himself against the cabin wall. She felt his sharp intake of breath at the pain, but said nothing. Pain was part of healing. He'd have to endure it. She fed him slowly, listening to his breathing, gauging his strength. When the bowl was empty, she set it aside. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb. Caleb Thorne." Ruth's hands stilled. She'd heard that name. Her father had spoken of Caleb Thorne, one of the best mountain men in the territory, known for his skill with a rifle and his ability to survive situations that would kill other men. The Caleb Thorne, the one who survived 3 weeks in the mountains with a broken leg? The same. His voice was bitter, though I may have used up my luck this time. "What happened?" Silence stretched. Ruth waited. She'd learned patience in the darkness. Finally, Caleb spoke. "I was betrayed. My own trapping party. Men I'd worked with for 2 years. We'd had a good season, the best in memory. Over 100 beaver pelts plus wolf, fox, and marten. Worth a fortune in St. Louis." He coughed again, and Ruth offered more water. "3 of them," he continued. "Garrett Cole, Marcus Webb, and Tom Dyer. We were heading back to winter camp when they jumped me. Cole got me from behind with a rifle butt. When I woke, they'd taken everything. The furs, my rifle, my horse, my gear. Left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and these wounds." "The bear attack?" "That came after. I was trying to make it to the fort following the creek. Weak, hungry, not thinking straight. Stumbled onto a grizzly's winter den. She came out swinging." He laughed, a harsh sound. "Probably saved my life in a way. The attack opened up the wounds Cole and his boys had given me when they beat me. Fresh blood in the cold air kept me alert enough to keep moving. Otherwise, I'd have just laid down in the snow and died quiet. Ruth's jaw tightened. She'd met Garrett Cole. He'd come to the cabin once with supplies, right after her father died. He'd looked at her with undisguised contempt, had made a crude comment about what a blind woman might do to earn better provisions. Her father's training had kept her from reacting. Showing fear was showing weakness, and weakness in the mountains was death. "I know Cole," she said quietly. "He's a bastard. He's worse than that. He's the kind of bastard who thinks being cruel makes him strong." Caleb shifted, groaning at the movement. "They'll come back, you know, once they realize I might have survived. They can't afford to have me telling people at the fort what they did." "Let them come," Ruth said. Her voice was calm, but something cold had settled in her chest. "This is my territory. I know every inch of it, blind or not. They don't." "Ruth," Caleb's voice held warning. "These men are killers. They won't hesitate to hurt you to get to me." "I know." She stood, moving to check his bandages again. "But I don't intend to give them the chance." Over the next 2 weeks, as Caleb's strength slowly returned, Ruth taught him what her father had taught her, how to survive when you couldn't rely on sight. "Close your eyes," she instructed on the 5th day, when he could finally stand without assistance. "Really close them, not just shut them. Imagine they don't exist." Why? But he obeyed, standing unsteadily by the fire. "Because when they come, and they will come, they'll come at night. Garrett Cole is smart enough to know that's when you're weakest. But darkness is my advantage. If you're going to survive what's coming, you need to learn to fight the way I do." She moved around the cabin, making small sounds. A step here, a deliberately knocked cup there. "Tell me where I am." "By the table, now the door, now the woodpile." "Good. Your hearing isn't terrible. Now do it with me moving silently." She glided across the floor, her bare feet making almost no sound. Caleb stood still, head cocked, listening. After a moment, his hand shot out and grasped empty air. 2 feet to your left," Ruth said from behind him. "You're listening for sound, but you should be feeling for air displacement. When something moves through space, it pushes air. You can feel it if you pay attention." Day after day, she drilled him. How to identify threats by smell, the sharp tang of gun oil, the scent of tobacco, the distinctive odor of nervous sweat. How to move through the cabin in complete darkness without stumbling. How to distinguish between animal and human sounds in the forest. "The wind tells stories," she explained one evening as they sat by the fire. "Most people hear it and think it's just noise. But if you listen carefully, you can hear what it's moving through. Wind through pine sounds different than wind through bare aspen. Wind over fresh snow sounds different than wind over crusted ice. And wind carrying human scent sounds different than clean wind." Caleb listened, truly listened, perhaps for the first time in his life. "How do you know when the bear attacked me it was recent?" "The ice crystals in your wounds were still sharp. Old crystals melt slightly and refreeze, getting rounder. Sharp means fresh, no more than 2 hours old. Also, the wounds were cold but not frozen solid, which meant you'd stayed warm enough after the attack to keep your core temperature up. That meant you'd kept moving." "You learned all this from your father?" "My father gave me the tools. I learned the rest by necessity." She paused, her face toward the fire. "When you're blind and alone in the mountains, you learn fast or you die. There's no middle ground." "The people at the fort," Caleb said carefully. "They don't help you." Ruth laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The people at the fort would be perfectly happy if I froze to death tomorrow. Then they could take my cabin, my furs, my traps, everything my father built, without having to feel guilty about it. A blind woman has no place out here, they think. I'm just taking up resources that could go to useful people." "That's why you saved me," Caleb said slowly, understanding dawning. not just because it was the right thing to do, but because having a sighted man here changes the equation, makes you less vulnerable. Partially, Ruth admitted, though I would have pulled you inside even if that weren't true. My father taught me that survival doesn't mean losing your humanity. The moment you can watch someone die when you could save them is the moment you become something less than human. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was. Ruth's voice softened. Better than he needed to be. When I lost my sight, he could have sent me away. Most men would have. Instead, he spent 14 years making sure I could survive without him. She turned toward Caleb, though her eyes didn't focus on him. He died of consumption 2 winters ago, coughed himself to death over 6 months, couldn't hunt, couldn't trap, could barely breathe at the end. And still, even in those last weeks, he was teaching me how to cure meat so it would last longer, how to read weather patterns, how to survive. I'm sorry. Don't be. He gave me what I needed. She stood, moving to the door. Now I need to check the perimeter. Cole and his men could come any time now. You've been here almost 3 weeks. If they've heard you survived, they'll be making plans. Ruth. Caleb's voice stopped her. I can help with that. I know how these men think. Good. Tell me. Caleb stood, moving carefully. His wounds were healing, but he was still far from fully recovered. Cole is smart but arrogant. He'll underestimate you because you're blind and because you're a woman. That's his weakness. Webb is a follower. He'll do whatever Cole says. He's dangerous because he's loyal but stupid. Won't question orders, even bad ones. And Dyer. Tom Dyer's the one you need to watch. He's quiet, patient, likes to observe before acting. He'll be the one who spots the traps, who notices things are off. If we're going to rig something around the cabin, we need to make it subtle enough that it doesn't trigger his suspicions until it's too late. Ruth smiled, and Caleb felt a chill. It wasn't a kind smile. Then we'd better get to work, she said. They spent the next week preparing. Ruth already had basic defenses in place. She'd installed them after her father died, knowing that a blind woman alone was an easy target. But now, with Caleb's help and his knowledge of how Cole thought, they could make something more elaborate. Tripwires first, Ruth said, but not the kind that trigger immediately. We want them to think they've spotted the traps and avoided them. That'll make them overconfident. They strung thin wire at ankle height around the cabin's perimeter, but these wires did nothing except make a soft chiming sound, bells from Ruth's meager Christmas decoration, barely audible. Someone being careful would hear them and step over, feeling clever. The real traps come after, Caleb said, understanding her strategy. When they think they're safe. Exactly. The real defenses were more brutal. Deadfalls rigged to drop when someone put weight on specific boards near the door. A covered pit 3 feet from the cabin's side window, filled with sharpened stakes and covered with a layer of bark and snow. A snare that would catch a leg and jerk the victim off their feet, dangling them upside down. Your father teach you all this? Caleb asked, testing the tension on one of the snares. Some. The rest I learned from a Crow woman who came through with her husband one winter. She was blind in one eye from a bear attack, nearly blind in the other from sickness. Didn't stop her from being one of the deadliest people I've ever met. She taught me that traps aren't just for animals. They're for anyone who means you harm. As they worked, Ruth told Caleb about the day her father died. How she'd sat with him through his last night, listening to his breathing grow more labored. How, with his last words, he'd told her to never let anyone make her believe she was helpless. Ruthie, she recited, her voice taking on the cadence of memory. Being blind doesn't make you weak. Being afraid to use what you have, that's what makes you weak. You've got a mind that can solve problems most men can't even see. Use it. Sounds like he knew what was coming, Caleb said quietly. After he was gone, I mean. He did. He knew the fort wouldn't take care of me, knew they saw me as a burden. He made me promise I'd survive, no matter what it took. She paused, her hands still on the rope she was tying. And and that's a promise I intend to keep. On the 20th day after Caleb's arrival, they came. Ruth woke first, around 2 in the morning. She didn't know the exact time. Time for her was measured by internal rhythms, by the quality of silence, by the way the cold felt against her skin. But she knew it was the deepest part of night when even predators rested. She sat up in her bedroll, listening. Nothing obvious, but something had changed. A shift in the air pressure, a barely audible sound that didn't belong. She reached across and touched Caleb's shoulder. He woke instantly. Mountain man reflexes, trained by years of sleeping with one eye open. "They're here," she whispered. Caleb listened. At first he heard nothing. Then, there. A footstep, carefully placed, the whisper of fabric against bark. 3 men moving with practiced stealth through the forest toward the cabin. They rose silently. Ruth moved to her position near the fire, feeding it enough to keep a dim light going. She wanted the men to think they'd find their targets asleep and helpless. Caleb positioned himself in the corner, rifle loaded, waiting. The first man approached the door. Ruth heard him test the handle, locked as expected. A pause. Then the sound of a knife working at the wood around the lock. Patient, methodical, that would be Dyer. The second and third men were circling to the side window. Ruth heard them whispering. Too confident now, thinking they had the advantage. One of them stumbled slightly, and Ruth heard the soft chime of the warning bells. Good. Right where she wanted them. The window shattered inward, and a man started to climb through. The moment his weight settled on the frame, the deadfall triggered. A log Ruth had rigged in the rafters swung down like a pendulum, slamming into the man's torso with devastating force. He screamed, Marcus Webb by the voice, and fell backward into the snow. At the same moment, the door burst open. Dyer rushed in, knife drawn, expecting to find Ruth defenseless. Instead, he found Caleb's rifle barrel 2 feet from his face. "Drop it," Caleb said quietly. Dyer froze, calculating. His eyes darted to Ruth, who hadn't moved from her position by the fire. "You're making a mistake, Thorne. This blind cow can't testify to anything. You've got no proof of what happened out there." "I heard every word you said at the window," Ruth said calmly. "About how you'd make it look like an accident. About splitting the furs 3 ways now instead of 4. About how Caleb won't be telling tales anymore. Voice carries on cold night air. Even blind women can hear murder being planned." Dyer's face twisted. Nobody will believe a cripple. Maybe, but they'll believe the scars on Caleb's body, and they'll definitely believe this. Ruth reached into her coat and pulled out a leather journal. "My father's trapping log. Every transaction, every trade, every man he dealt with logged and dated, including notes about Garrett Cole trying to cheat him on beaver pelts 3 years ago, and about Tom Dyer being seen in the area the day my father died, the day he supposedly fell off a cliff by accident." Dyer's face went white. "You can't read that. You're blind." "No, but Caleb can. Every word." Ruth's smile was cold. "Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? That I wouldn't remember the smell of your tobacco when you came to pay respects after my father died? That I wouldn't notice you knew exactly where my father's claim was, even though he'd never told anyone at the fort? You killed him, Dyer. You pushed him off that cliff because he'd found gold, and you wanted it for yourself. You can't prove—" The rest of his words were lost as Garrett Cole appeared in the doorway, dragging a wounded Marcus Webb. Cole took in the scene. Caleb's rifle, Ruth's calm stance, Dyer's panicked expression, and laughed. "Well, Tom, looks like the blind bitch is smarter than you gave her credit for." Cole dropped Webb in the snow. "Doesn't matter. 3 against 2. And one of the 2 can't even see." He drew his own rifle, aiming at Caleb. "Kill Thorne, Tom. I'll handle the woman." Dyer moved, but not toward Caleb. Instead, he lunged at Ruth, knife flashing. It was a fatal mistake. Ruth had been tracking his position by sound since he entered the cabin. She knew exactly where he was, exactly how he was standing, exactly which direction he would attack from. As he lunged, she sidestepped with the efficiency of someone who'd practiced the movement 1,000 times, and her hand shot out, grabbing a cast-iron pan from beside the fire. The pan connected with Dyer's skull with a sickening crack. He dropped like a stone. Simultaneously, Caleb dove to the side as Cole fired. The shot went wide, and Caleb's return fire didn't. Cole staggered, clutching his shoulder, and fell through the doorway into the snow. For a moment, silence. Then the sound of Cole trying to crawl away, leaving a trail of blood. "Stay down," Caleb told him, moving to the door, "or the next shot goes in your skull." Cole collapsed, gasping. Caleb checked Webb, unconscious but breathing. Then Dyer, who was groaning, blood matting his hair. "You killed my father," Ruth said quietly, walking to where Dyer lay. "You pushed him off the cliff. You wanted his gold claim." "Prove it," Dyer spat. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can." Ruth knelt beside him, her sightless eyes somehow finding his face in the darkness. "Because you just admitted it. You said, 'You can't prove,' before I mentioned how he died. I said he died. I didn't say how. But you knew it was a cliff because you were there." Dyer's face went slack with realization. "Also," Ruth continued, "my father didn't fall by accident. He was too careful for that. But he did have a habit of standing at the edge of his claim, looking out at the view. Only one spot where he did that, and only one way someone could get close enough to push him without him hearing them approach." She leaned closer. "You came from upwind. My father taught me how to do that when hunting. You used his own techniques against him. But you made a mistake. You smoked your pipe right before. My father came home smelling like cherry tobacco the night before he died. The same tobacco you smoke. I smelled it on you when you came to the cabin after." "You waited 2 years to say something." Dyer's voice was desperate now. "I had no proof, just suspicion. But now I have your confession, Caleb's testimony about the ambush, and 3 men who came to my cabin in the middle of the night intending murder." Ruth stood. "The fort will listen now, and if they don't, the territorial marshal will." They brought the 3 men to Fort William the next morning, bound and loaded on a makeshift travois. The fort's inhabitants gathered as Caleb and Ruth told their story, with Ruth producing her father's journal and Caleb displaying the scars from his beating and the bear attack. The fort's trader, a man named Sullivan, who'd been one of the few to treat Ruth with basic decency, examined the evidence. He read the journal entries, questioned the 3 prisoners, and listened to Ruth's methodical recounting of the evidence against Dyer. "This is serious enough for the territorial court," Sullivan finally said. "We'll hold them here until the marshal arrives in spring. But Miss Brennan, Mr. Thorne, I owe you both an apology. We've failed in our duty to you." Ruth said nothing. She knew hollow apologies when she heard them. But in the weeks that followed, something changed at the fort. People who'd previously ignored or dismissed Ruth began coming to her with questions. How did she navigate in darkness? Could she teach their children who'd been injured or born with disabilities? How did she set her traps so effectively? Ruth answered their questions, but she didn't forget their previous cruelty. She helped because it was the right thing to do, not because she'd forgiven them. Caleb stayed through the winter, ostensibly to recover from his wounds and to ensure he could testify against his attackers. But as the weeks turned to months, both he and Ruth knew there was more to it than that. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership born of necessity that slowly became something more. Caleb's eyes and Ruth's other senses complemented each other perfectly. When they checked trap lines together, he'd spot game sign while she'd identify the species by scent and sound. When they tracked, he'd follow visual trails while she'd read the story told by broken branches and disturbed earth. "You hunt like a wolf pack," Sullivan observed one day, watching them work together, each compensating for the other's weaknesses, amplifying the other's strengths. It was an accurate assessment, but it was more than that, and they both knew it. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, the territorial marshal came with it. The trial was brief. Ruth's testimony, corroborated by her father's journal and Caleb's account, was damning. All three men were convicted. Cole and Dyer were sentenced to hang for murder and attempted murder. Webb, who'd cooperated and revealed the location of the stolen furs, received a lesser sentence of 10 years hard labor. The day before the hanging, Caleb found Ruth sitting outside the cabin, face turned toward the sun she couldn't see but could feel. "Dyer will die tomorrow," he said. "Your father will be avenged." "Vengeance doesn't bring him back," Ruth replied. "But justice means he didn't die for nothing. His death exposed evil. That matters." Caleb sat beside her. "What will you do now? Stay here?" "This is my home. Where else would I go?" She paused. "What about you? You're healed now, strong enough to return to trapping." "I could do that," Caleb said slowly. "Build a new stake, buy supplies, hire a new crew. Go back to the life I had. But I keep thinking about what your father told you, about using what you have instead of mourning what you've lost. I lost my old life, my reputation, my wealth, my independence. I could try to rebuild all that." He reached out and took Ruth's hand, the first time he'd initiated such contact. "Or I could build something new, something better." Ruth's fingers intertwined with his. "What did you have in mind?" "A partnership. Real partnership, not the kind I had with Cole and his thugs. You and me, working these mountains together. I bring the site, you bring everything else." He hesitated. "And maybe over time we could build more than just a business partnership." Ruth turned toward him, her sightless eyes somehow seeing more than most people's working ones. "Caleb Thorne, are you proposing to a blind fat woman you met because she saved your life? I'm proposing to a woman who's the smartest, toughest, most capable person I've ever met, who happens to be blind. The rest doesn't matter. It matters to most people. I'm not most people. Mountain life burned that out of me." He squeezed her hand. "I've spent 3 months watching you navigate a world that would kill most sighted men. I've seen you outsmart killers, tend wounds, survive conditions that broke stronger men. Being blind isn't a weakness in you. It's just a fact. Like being tall or having brown hair, it doesn't define you." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My father would have liked you." "Is that a yes?" "It's a, let's see what we can build together." She smiled. "You'll have to be patient. I'm not easy to live with. I'm particular about how things are arranged. I don't like people moving my belongings, and I won't change how I do things just because you think there's a better way." "I wouldn't dream of it," Caleb said, "though I reserve the right to argue when you're being stubborn." "Then we'll get along fine. I like a good argument." They sat together, watching the sun track across the sky, Caleb seeing it, Ruth feeling it, and both understanding that they'd found something rare in the harsh mountain country, a true partner who saw past surfaces to the strength beneath. The years that followed were hard but good. Caleb and Ruth became fixtures in the territory, known for their unusual but effective partnership. Trappers would see them working the high country, Caleb watching for game, Ruth reading sign with her hands and ears, and marvel at their efficiency. "They're bringing in twice what a normal team gets," Sullivan told visitors. "Caleb scouts and shoots, Ruth processes and prepares. She can skin a beaver in half the time it takes anyone else, and her curing is the best in the territory. Her pelts fetch premium prices." But it was more than just business success. Ruth began teaching survival skills to anyone who would listen, with a particular focus on those the fort had previously dismissed as useless: the injured, the disabled, the old. She taught a boy who'd lost an arm in a logging accident how to trap one-handed. She taught a girl born deaf how to read weather patterns through vibration and smell. She taught veterans of mountain accidents how to compensate for lost senses. "She's building an army of us," said old Pete, a trapper who'd lost an eye to an Indian arrow. All the ones the world thought were done for. Turns out we've got talents the whole body'd never develop because they never have to. Caleb watched this transformation with growing respect. The woman he'd married, they'd wed 2 years after his rescue in a simple ceremony at the fort, was changing not just individual lives, but the entire community's understanding of what it meant to be capable. 5 years after their marriage, Ruth became pregnant. The fort's women worried. Childbirth was dangerous enough for healthy women, let alone blind ones. But Ruth approached it with the same methodical competence she brought to everything else. "I can't see the baby," she told the midwife, "but I can feel everything that's happening inside my body. I can tell when something's wrong faster than you can see it. Trust me." The birth was long but successful. When the midwife placed the baby in Ruth's arms, Ruth's hands moved over the tiny body with infinite gentleness, reading every feature, every finger and toe. "A girl," the midwife said, "healthy and strong." "She has Caleb's nose," Ruth said, smiling. Then, softly, "Can she see?" Caleb, who'd been waiting outside, came in at the midwife's call. He watched his daughter's eyes track movement, focus on light. "She can see," he said, emotion thick in his voice. "She has her mother's determination, but she'll see the world with her eyes open." They named her Sarah, after Ruth's mother. As Sarah grew, she became something unprecedented, a child who learned to navigate both the sighted and non-sighted worlds. Ruth taught her to move through darkness, to read the world through senses beyond sight. Caleb taught her to use her eyes, to read tracks, to shoot. By age 6, Sarah could find her way through the forest blindfolded as easily as with eyes open. She could identify animal tracks by touch as well as sight, and she'd inherited her mother's gift for teaching. Other children would follow her around, begging to learn her tricks. "She's going to be formidable," Sullivan observed one day, watching Sarah help her mother with the trap lines. Both worlds in one person. But the true test of Ruth's legacy came when Sarah was 8. A group of children from a new settlement upriver arrived at the fort, refugees from an Indian attack. Among them was a boy, perhaps 10, who'd been blinded by smoke and debris when his home burned. He sat in the corner of the trading post, silent and hollow-eyed, while the other children played. Sarah approached him, sat down, and said, "You think your life is over because you can't see. You're wrong." The boy didn't respond. "My mother has been blind since she was 11. She survived alone in these mountains for 2 years after my grandfather died. She saved my father's life when he was dying in the snow. She outsmarted and captured 3 killers. And she taught me that seeing isn't just about eyes. It's about paying attention to everything around you." She took the boy's hand. "Want to learn how?" Over the following weeks, Sarah taught the boy what Ruth had taught her: how to navigate by sound, how to identify people by footstep and smell, how to defend himself despite his blindness. And slowly, the hollow look left the boy's face, replaced by something like hope. "Your daughter's remarkable," the boy's mother told Ruth one evening. "She gave my son his life back." "She's just teaching what she learned," Ruth said. But privately to Caleb, she admitted, "She's going to do more than I ever did. She has everything I have, plus sight, plus the gift of teaching. She's going to change how people think about disability." Caleb pulled her close. "She learned that from you. Everything she is comes from watching you refuse to let the world define your limits." Years passed. Sarah grew into a young woman who led expeditions into the high country, teaching groups of broken people, the term she rejected violently, how to not just survive but thrive. She'd take groups of disabled veterans, injured trappers, and people written off as useless and bring them back transformed. "Miss Thorne makes you prove you're tougher than you think," one veteran said. "She doesn't coddle. She just shows you how to use what you have instead of crying about what you lost." Ruth and Caleb grew old together, their partnership deepening with every year. They expanded their cabin, built a reputation, accumulated modest wealth. But more than that, they built a legacy. On Ruth's 50th birthday, the fort held a celebration. People came from settlements 100 miles away. Trappers, traders, Indians, settlers, everyone whose life Ruth had touched. Sullivan, now aged and gray, stood to speak. 27 years ago, when Thomas Brennan died, I'm ashamed to say many of us thought his daughter would die within months. We saw a burden, a helpless blind woman who couldn't possibly survive. He looked at Ruth, seated with Caleb beside her and Sarah standing behind them. We were blind, all of us with working eyes, and we couldn't see what was right in front of us. Ruth Brennan, Ruth Thorne now, taught us that strength isn't about what you can see. It's about what you can do with whatever you have. She survived, she thrived, she built a family, a business, a teaching legacy. And she did it all without ever seeing the world the way we do. He raised his glass. To Ruth Thorne, who sees more clearly than any of us ever will. The crowd erupted in cheers. Ruth sat still, tears tracking down her weathered face. That night, lying in bed with Caleb beside her, Ruth said quietly, "I never thought I'd matter. After my father died, I thought I'd just fade away, another casualty of mountain life." "You did more than matter," Caleb replied. "You changed how an entire territory thinks about what's possible. You proved that disability is only limiting if you let it be." "My father did that," Ruth corrected. "He showed me how. I just lived it." "No," Caleb said firmly. "Your father gave you tools, but you built the life. You chose to survive when everyone expected you to die. You chose to help others when you could have been bitter. You chose to love when you could have closed yourself off. Those were your choices, Ruth. Own them." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would, for staying when you could have left, for building this with me. Thank you for saving my life and then showing me how to really live it." Caleb kissed her forehead. "Best decision I ever made, collapsing on your doorstep." Ruth laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Worst decision you ever made, more like." "I'm stubborn, opinionated, and impossible." "Yes," Caleb agreed, "and you're the strongest person I know. I'm honored to have spent my life with you." They fell asleep like that, two people who'd found each other in a frozen wasteland and built warmth, love, and legacy from nothing but determination and partnership.